Picture this. Your players kick down the door, swords flashing, righteous fire blazing. The lich goes down in 3 rounds. High fives all around, right? But later at the tavern, they're not buzzing about the lich. They're talking about that one dark, silent room before the lich fight. You know, the one with the creepy scratching sounds and the one child-sized coffin. That's the power of dread. It's more memorable, it's more exciting, it's more dreadful. And Wights, those hateful, life-draining remnants of fallen warriors, they totally deserve that kind of dread. They're much lower CR than a lich. But how often do their lairs just end up being another room with some angry corpses? And it's way too often, if you ask me. Dungeons & Dragons is a storytelling tool, and Wights have the ability to have a great deal of storytelling potential. They don't have the build-up the Lich requires to introduce them into the campaign, or many of the undead, but quite often they're just used as the same kinds of foot soldiers that skeletons and zombies are, and that I think is to our detriment. So hello adventurers and welcome back to the Red Quills. My name is Ryan and today we are designing the lair for a Wight. So we're going to be talking about how to create an undead encounter for, CR5, CR6, CR7 or so. We're going to be thinking about how to create the ambience of it, how to make a dungeon that works to its advantages, and what tactics, strategies, and levels of attrition you need to be introducing to make the players feel the sense of dread that is the ideal spice for this campaign. Because, you see, Wights are more than just undead brutes. They are beings of pure malice, often hanging on to the cunning and the skills that they had in life, now all twisted up by an undying hatred for everything that lives. And their lairs should show that off, not just be a place that they happen to be squatting, but they're an extension of their tormented existence and a death trap, plain and simple. So, grab your notes, grab out your grid paper and your pencils. We are going to sit down and start sketching out a dungeon for the undead. First things first, atmosphere. Because this isn't just about pretty descriptions, it's like the invisible monsters in the room. A Wight's barrow should feel wrong from the second the players get close. Think about classic warning signs. The air grows unnaturally still, almost unnervingly cold. Any plants near the barrow are dead or dying, maybe twisted into unnatural shapes. And then there's the silence. A pervasive, heavy silence that's almost louder than any sound. And inside, the architecture itself should feel like an enemy. Wight lairs are often ancient, built long before anyone knew much about comfortable construction, so you get these cramped, oppressive spaces. Imagine narrow passages that force the party into single file, just perfect for an ambush. Ceilings are uncomfortably low, making weapon swings awkward, especially for bigger adventurers. The very stone of the walls might feel cold and damp, not with regular water, but with some kind of chilling, unnatural condensation. Thick dust lies everywhere, and it's not just the dust of ages, it's a gritty, bone-filled dust that clings to clothes and catches in the throat. Cobwebs are ancient, blanketing everything, and they break with a sound like tearing silk. And remember as well, the less is more idea. You don't need to throw a monster at them at every part of this dungeon. You want to cultivate, with an enemy like a Wight, with the undead in general, a sense of something else is coming. Something else is going to pop out of the next shadow. Deep down, all of us, on some level, are afraid of the dark. We fear what lurks in the shadows of the night, what hides under the bed, what sinks into the closet. All of us somewhere are 2-year-old children who fear something, and you want to access that unnerving, unnatural, unreasonable fear, because that's where the fun of this encounter is. We know, as players, as adults, that ghosts and wights and liches aren't real. But there is a small part of us that can't be reasoned with, that can't be negotiated with, that is still afraid anyway. And that is the purpose of what we are building here. We want to lock into that. You want to make them always worry. What else is watching? So adding in more and more details that only hint, never too much, only just add on to this feeling of wrongness is what you want to be aiming for. Don't cram it full of encounters. Cram it full of ambience instead. But a truly terrifying place needs more than just a spooky description. It needs a story, a reason to be so awful. So the lore of this barrow is the foundation for all of the horror that you're building. Because wights in lore aren't just random undead popping up. They're often the cursed leftovers of people who were pretty significant in life. They're honored chieftains, mighty warriors, or even tragic figures whose pride or dark deeds cursed them into this undying state. And it's a goldmine for narrative hooks and ways to really deepen your player's fear. So we're going to make a barrow here, an old kind of burial chamber popularized by the Lord of the Rings. This is the barrow on Barrows-downs. And it wasn't just dug as a simple grave. It was built millennia ago for a knight who was once great, a real figure of renown, but maybe this knight harbored a terrible secret, a shocking betrayal, or an unbending pride that became a magnet for dark energies when they died, they're twisting their spirit into a hateful wight. And there's a number of ways that you can do that. Just look to historical lays or old ballads. Think about, the Knight Lancelot, who was the greatest knight on life, the most powerful warrior, but who fell in love with someone who he should never have loved. Think about Othello from Shakespeare, who was, a wonderful strategist and constantly being, put upon by people who distrusted him, but who himself was misled by the man he trusted most and betrayed. Think about all of the characters in any story that you've read from long ago, people who are so great and so larger than life that their positive traits become their weaknesses. A person who is a great warrior is very prideful. A person who cannot be stopped cannot be stopped. Because that dual nature, which is, a good virtue twisted into a pit of despair, is this powerful theme that we want to explore. And so how do you get that lore across without just dumping a wall of text on your players? I mean, you can scatter clues throughout the barrow. Faded murals on the walls could show scenes from the wight's life, maybe heroic deeds that get darker, more questionable. Inscriptions in an ancient, forgotten dialect might offer cryptic warnings or sad laments from those who built the tomb. Even the guardians and the traps inside the barrow can tie onto the lore. Maybe the riddle on the door relates to a key virtue the knight failed in at life, or the spectral guardians are bound by old oaths made to the figure before they fell from grace. And I have several aspects that I'm going to put into this map as we go through. The riddle on the door directly references that which was most important to him in life. There is a ghost that can speak to exactly what he suffered and went through that has twisted him into the thing that now sits in the center of the barrow. There's the ambience within the collapsed halls and the ancient chambers, and there are the oaths that are inscribed onto the sarcophagi that keep the skeletal soldiers of the Wight imprisoned. All of these things add to the lore of the barrow, this story that you're unfolding as you go deeper and deeper and deeper down, because that's what a tomb should really be. It's a storytelling focus. It's the opportunity for you to give the players the chance to explore some history. All right, let's walk through how to actually create this barrow, chamber by chamber. There are 8 chambers within this dungeon, and each of them fits into one of the categories that I've talked about in my fractal chamber design in the Mega Dungeons video. But I'll go through and talk about why each of them exists and how they complement each other. We'll go through it step by step. So the first one is the barrow gate. And the entrance itself to any tomb needs to make a statement. This is not a friendly welcome mat. It is a seal on a place of immense dread. The barrow gate of Barrows-downs is described as being monumental and oppressive. Imagine massive weathered stones, maybe carved with grim warnings or faded symbols of warding. The air around it is noticeably colder, and you can feel a heavy sense of foreboding hanging there. And the mechanic here really sets the tone straight away. In order to get into the barrow, you must make a sacrifice, a blood sacrifice to the doors. The inscription on the outside makes that perfectly clear in an ancient language that perhaps they cannot understand, but the pictograms will also explain it for those who do not speak the language. One of the players must make a blood sacrifice on the doors, and that will give them a point of exhaustion. One of the players have to willingly take a point of exhaustion. And this supernatural toll tells them that the barrow itself drains vitality. It will weaken one of them to a place in which they are at disadvantage for the rest of the barrow. It hints at the life-draining nastiness and makes it clear that this place demands a personal cost for anyone brave or foolish enough to enter. And it's a brilliant way to tell your players this place is serious, it will take something from you. And on the other hand, it also hints back at one of the other things that I tend to really kind of niggle at when creating dungeons and old tombs like this, which is, why doesn't everyone wander in and out? Why hasn't this place been looted before? And a toll like that really answers that question. No one wants to do that. You're already weakening yourself as you go in. And after that point, as you're already weakened and you face the challenges, you're at a disadvantage from that point on. It clearly explains why this place has not been violated before. Because once they're past the gate, they get to the old guard, and the silence might be the first thing the players really notice. This chamber is lined with sarcophagi, the resting places of the Wight's former comrades or even earlier victims. The air is deathly still. The terrifying bit is the sudden, violent shattering of that silence. As the players move deeper, the sarcophagi burst open and 6 skeletons come clattering out to ambush them. The cramped nature of the barrow really works for the skeletons here. It potentially bottlenecks them, and the encounter is a classic. The old skeletons popping out. Again, that's a very low-level kind of encounter that you can do here. The environment doesn't really favor the skeletons in any way. This isn't a challenge. This is, honestly, it's more ambience than combat. But that's your opportunity to really work it in. You want to work the terror in here. They've already made a sacrifice. They are already on the back foot. As they're going through, yes, the silence is suddenly shattered by the cracking of stone. But just before that, one of them feels creeping digits on the floor, slowly sliding up their ankles to grab them into place. One of them is grappled as the stone of the sarcophagi slams open with a crack, and they go into combat. That's what we want here. That's the disadvantage we're putting them at. It's entirely mental. It's entirely ambient. Deeper in, their way is blocked by a heavy stone door, probably an intricately carved one with images related to the Wight's life or why the barrow was built. An inscription, a riddle, is etched onto the surface. It brings knights to their knees and men to their wise bed. Speak that which hounds have, and fools do not. I wrote that, I'm very proud. The answer is loyalty, right? And we're going with a theme here. This Wight was once a knight of great renown, rewarded for his service, his loyalty to his king. And in the end, he betrayed that king in an attempt to protect the people that he loved most and was cursed for it forevermore. That's the theme we're going with here. You can, of course, change the riddle to fit your own themes. So your players will have to answer the riddle in order to open the door, and there should be clues on the walls, murals of, the events of the past so that they can more accurately guess what is happening. But another option here, if you are using this barrow with higher level players and you want to make it a bit more of a challenge, is there is no reason for the skeletons who have been raised from the dead to not continue to raise from the dead. There's no mechanic for how long they stay dead after a certain point. So if you have had them, being slain in the first chamber, in the old guard, and they move into the puzzle door and they're sitting there before it, wondering at the history of this place, and then they hear the creaking of bones as the skeletons, joint by joint, come together, reorganizing themselves, standing back up, taking up their swords and their armor, and coming back to attack them. Even if a group of 6 skeletons is absolutely no trouble at all to a party of level 5 players, that is not fun. That is not a fun thing for them to do. Every minute they are revived, every minute they come back. And you can change that. You can change to 5 or 10 or even an hour, depending on what you want to do. You can have them not rise at all. But if their life force, if their duty to protecting the Wight is the reason that they are bound to undeath, use that. Absolutely, why not? Once they get past the riddle door, they get to the center. And this chamber is the real heart of the barrow. It's a place that speaks volumes about the Wight's past. Faded murals decorate the walls, showing scenes from the Wight's life, maybe moments of glory, scenes of leadership, or even a subtle hint of the darkness that eventually ate them up. Relics, all tarnished and dusty, might lie on plinths or in niches. An altar dominates the room, and it's here that the purpose of the sword, which they'll find later, and the shield that they also find later, starts to click into place. Because placing these items on the altar is a key step. It's another kind of riddle door. Because in order to open the treasury, which is the center of the barrow, the deepest chamber of it, they have to perform in reverse the same ritual which was used to lay him to rest. So his armor and his weapons were scattered from his body. And that's great. You can absolutely use that. So we've got a shield and a sword that have been taken from the altar and put into different parts of the barrow. If you bring them back from those places onto the altar, then the door opens. The murals on the wall should reveal that fairly simply to them. You don't necessarily need an investigation check, but a few moments of wandering around, or even, the opportunity to describe some ancient dusty texts. Or even if you do want to make it a bit more involved, have someone have come into the barrow beforehand, perhaps an archaeologist or a cartographer of some kind, who barricaded themselves into this room to avoid the skeletons and managed to figure out what the ritual was, but was too terrified to open the door and also too terrified to leave. Gives you the chance to have that explained to them in a way. So after they get into the center, they've got two choices. They can head up to the collapsed hall or down to the star halls. The collapsed hall is the part which is downright treacherous. Here we've got a hostile environment. The hall is partially caved in and fills the air with a thick dust, and even worse, poisonous spores released from disturbing fungi or ancient decaying stuff. Visibility is terrible, which probably forces the players to move slowly and very carefully, and just breathing is hazardous, meaning a constitution saving throw to avoid exhaustion or the poisoned condition. The sword, a key item for the center chamber, is found here. Maybe it's clutched in the skeletal hand of some previous unlucky explorer or lying half buried under the rubble, depending on how you want this barrow characterized within the context of your campaign. But I would suggest that it is at the far end of the hall, untouched by the decay around it, sitting upon a plinth, the shining star metal longsword of the old lord of lost Tarbanic. Once they've retrieved the sword, they can head south into the Star Hall. And this chamber is well named. It throws a unique, disorienting curveball at the party, which is a magical darkness. It's not just dim light, it's an oppressive, supernatural blackness that just swallows all non-magical light sources. Even dark vision might be messed up, or only offer vague, unsettling shapes. The air might feel unnaturally cold and still, the silence absolute except for the player's own strained breathing. This hall really tests the party's cleverness. Do they have magical light? Can they navigate by touch or sound? Are there patterns on the floor that they can feel their way along? The party steps into the room. The door closes behind them, and immediately the darkness is absolute. A darkness that snuffs out conventional torches and lanterns. A darkness that even dark vision cannot see through. Pitch blackness, they exist in the night from which all wights are born. They have to feel their way along to the edge of the chamber to find the plinth upon which the shield of the old lord has been seated. But that's not the only challenge. In the same chamber in which the altar of the shield can be found, in the same unnatural darkness, is a ghost, bound here not by the same curse as the Lord of Old Tarbanic, but by unfinished business. An old friend, perhaps the king to whom the Wight was sworn, resides here in longing and regret for what has passed. And depending on the choices of the players, whether they are desecrating this place, whether they are respectful, whether they attack it upon hearing its voice, because the ghost can see through the darkness, even if they cannot, it can give them more context for what will happen during the ritual, how the Wight will act, and the history of the Wight's origins. And finally, after you've brought the sword and the shield into the center of the chamber, you open the vault. And that's the final chamber. It's the Wight's inner sanctum, the resting place of whatever treasure the barrow holds. The air is heavy with the weight of centuries, thick with the Wight's malevolent presence. And this is where the players can finally confront the wakened Wight, now fully aware that they are here, probably furious that they've disturbed its tomb and messed with its relics. The promise of treasure is a nice lure, but the main event is the climactic battle, and I would absolutely recommend here that the battle is not confined to one room. Because look, a truly terrifying Wight isn't just a bag of hit points with a nasty touch attack. It's an intelligent, hateful, undead predator that uses its lair like a finely tuned weapon. Remember, Wights often keep their intellect and their cunning from their previous life, and it's now supercharged by undying malice. These are not mindless zombies. So first off, let's quickly touch on what wights can actually do. They are resistant to non-magical weapons unless they're silvered. They are immune to poison and conditions like exhausted and being poisoned. That already makes them pretty tough, and we have already established an area within the barrow that can establish a poisoned condition for the players. But their signature move, Life Drain, is what makes them genuinely fearsome, and not only does it deal necrotic damage, but it also reduces the target's hit point maximum, and that reduction lasts until a long rest. If a humanoid's hit point maximum drops to 0 from this attack, they die, and 12 hours later, they pop back up as a zombie under the wight's control. A wight can command up to 12 of these zombies, basically creating its own backup dancers, and some wights might also use longswords or longbows, showing off martial skills. I would recommend this wight use the sword and the shield that they have retrieved. So how does a cunning wight use these abilities and its barrow? Because it knows its home like the back of its skeletal hand. The wight of Barrows wouldn't just stand there in the middle of the vault waiting politely for the adventurers. Oh no, it would use the barrow's narrow passages, any secret corridors you've designed, and you should, and those lovely areas of darkness to its full advantage. It is an ambush predator through and through. Imagine your players have placed the sword and the shield on the altar in the central chamber, and with a groan and a sliding sound of rock on rock, the door to the vault opens. Within is a long, thin chamber, fuddled by the gloom. Mounds of gold and old chests and artifacts from archaic times lie in piles to the walls of this chamber, and as you head in, you can see at the far end a large throne. The players cautiously creep in, single file, in order to make their way through the thick doors. One after another, they step inside, and when they are 15, 20 feet in, when they can just begin to make out more of the outline of this throne, the player at the front sees that it is empty. With a thunk behind them, the wight drops down from the place where it was waiting, climbing on the wall above the door, and exits into the rest of the barrow, fleeing from them with a skeletal chuckle. So you got to think about these kinds of tactics. The wight will dart from shadows. It'll maybe zap a vulnerable party member with its life drain and then melt back into the darkness or through a hidden passage before the party can fully react. Its goal is to weaken them, to sow confusion, to ramp up the fear. The Star Hall with magical darkness is a perfect hunting ground for them, especially if it cannot be affected by the same condition. The poison of the collapsed hall, also perfect for it. Think about creating the whole barrow as an arena for fighting it. They must not only slay it, but find it first. And you can also think about how the wight can interact with the barrow to create lair-specific actions. Lair actions are so fun, and I would recommend them. Collapsing it is probably not a great idea because the wight should be very protective of its burial ground. But raising certain warriors from places that the players had not expected them to, extending the darkness of the Star Hall, creating clouds of toxic spores or dust, or even some small measure of control over the person who made the sacrifice at the gate by pulling upon the agreements that they unknowingly made with the oath upon the stone, are all things that you can do to give the wight more and more power. Its stat block is not the only way that you can have it fight them. Give it different abilities, location-specific abilities. After all, that's what we're doing here. There's much more that can be said about creating it specifically, about the outcome of this particular quest, but a lot of those details can be left up to the plot of the lore. I'm just here to talk about how to create the environment that will suit the wight and how to use its stat blocks, abilities, tactics, and lore in a way that really comes together with that. So, I think we've finished up. This is what we've got, the Barrow on Barrows-Downs. It is a chamber system designed upon the old archetypical burial chamber systems of ancient England, and it follows the strengths and weaknesses of the wight in a way that I think will really unnerve your players and fill them with a sense of dread. Once again, thank you to everyone who's been watching. If you enjoyed this, if you have ideas for what you would do for your own version of the undead chamber system, if you can bring the wight into your own campaign, not as a location-specific villain, but as a part of a larger campaign, perhaps the wight flees from the barrow to do something else, to perhaps raise a lich from undeath. There are all sorts of things you can do with an encounter like this that are appropriate, not just for a level 3 party, but for a level 5 or a level 7 party as well. There are ways in which you can bring this in to make your players aware that stat blocks are not the only thing that matters. As always, let me know if you want me to do any other specific monsters. I'm going to be finishing up this particular series fairly soon. I've got one more left to do of the things that I started with, and then I'm going to start taking audience suggestions as we go through. I've got other ideas for what to do for this really quick map series as well, but let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you find this helpful? Do you find it cool or useful for your own campaigns? I'm always very happy to hear any feedback that you might have. And thank you to my YouTube and Patreon subscribers. I could not do this without you. I am so grateful for your support. All right, good luck. Let me know what you do with this information, and I will see you next week for the next episode of Really Quick Maps. See you then. Because in order to open the because in order to open the treasury, which is the center of the barrow.